The whiskey bottle shattered against the boardwalk inches from Nora Easton's feet, spraying glass and amber liquid across her worn calico dress, as the mob's fury crescendoed behind her in the dusty streets of Angels Camp, California, on that scorching June afternoon in 1873. She had known this day would come eventually. The whispers had grown louder over the past months, the stares more hostile, the distrust palpable in every interaction since she had arrived in the gold-mining town 8 months prior. Her crime was simple in their eyes. She was educated, she read books openly. She wore her dark hair shorter than decent women should, and worst of all, she possessed medical knowledge that she shared freely with anyone who asked, regardless of their ability to pay or the color of their skin. In a town where the banker's wife had died in childbirth because the doctor had been too drunk to attend her, Nora's successful delivery of 3 healthy babies had sparked not gratitude but suspicion. Which? Someone screamed from the crowd. Unnatural woman. The accusation was absurd, medieval, yet it stuck because fear always found purchase in hearts that refused understanding. Nora had made the mistake of treating a Chinese railway worker's infected wound when no one else would touch him. She had dared to suggest that the contaminated well near the saloon might be causing the recurring stomach ailments plaguing the town. She had refused the advances of Roger Whitmore, the mine foreman, who now stood at the front of the mob with righteousness painted across his flushed face like war paint. "She consorts with heathens and savages," Roger shouted, his words slurring slightly. The afternoon drinking had emboldened the crowd beyond reason. "She brings shame to decent Christian folk." Nora's heart hammered against her ribs as she backed away from the advancing group of perhaps 20 townsfolk. She recognized most of them. There was Mrs. Patterson, whose son's fever Nora had broken just 3 weeks ago. There was Tom Sellers, whose infected tooth she had packed with herbs that saved him from blood poisoning. Gratitude, she had learned, was a shallow root that fear easily tore up. "I have done nothing wrong," Nora said, keeping her voice steady though her hands trembled. "I have only ever tried to help." "Help," Roger spat into the dirt. "You refused me, made me look a fool in front of the whole town. No decent woman refuses a man's honest proposal." There it was. The real wound that had festered into this moment. Roger had proposed marriage to Nora 2 months ago in front of the general store, loud and public, clearly expecting her gratitude for his willingness to wed a woman without family or fortune. When she had politely but firmly declined, explaining that she did not love him and did not wish to marry, his humiliation had transformed into something dangerous. "Your pride and your unnatural ways have no place here," Mrs. Henderson added, her voice shrill. "What kind of woman refuses an honest man's suit? What kind of woman reads books meant for men and practices medicine like she has the right?" Nora's mare, Juniper, was tied to the post outside the boarding house where she rented a small room. If she could reach the horse, she might be able to escape before the mob's anger turned to violence. She took another step backward, her boots kicking up dust from the sun-baked street. "Get out!" someone yelled, and others took up the cry. "Get out! Get out!" A rock flew through the air, striking Nora's shoulder hard enough to make her stumble. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate, but she did not cry out. She would not give them the satisfaction. Instead, she turned and ran toward Juniper, her skirts tangling around her legs as she moved. Behind her, the mob surged forward, their voices rising in a terrible chorus of righteous fury. She reached the mare with shaking hands, fumbling with the reins. Juniper sensed her fear and danced nervously as Nora struggled to mount. Another rock struck the post beside her head. The mob was close now, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on their breath and see the twisted hatred in their eyes. With a desperate heave, Nora pulled herself into the saddle just as hands grabbed at her skirt. She kicked Juniper hard, and the mare leaped forward, nearly trampling two men who had tried to block their path. They scattered with shouts of anger, and then Nora was galloping down the main street of Angel's Camp, leaving behind everything she had tried to build in this unforgiving place. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains as she fled, casting long shadows across the landscape. Nora urged Juniper faster, tears streaming down her face now that no one could see her weakness. 8 months of work, of trying to help people, of attempting to carve out a life for herself in a world that seemed determined to crush any woman who dared to exist outside its narrow boundaries. All of it gone in an afternoon because of one man's wounded pride and a town's fear of anything different. She did not know where she was going. East, away from Angel's Camp, into the foothills that rose toward the Sierra Nevada. The landscape was beautiful and indifferent to her suffering, golden grass rippling in the breeze, oak trees spreading their ancient branches over the trail. Juniper's hooves thundered against the hard, packed earth, and Nora leaned low over the mare's neck, urging her onward even as exhaustion began to pull at her limbs. She had fled her home in Boston 2 years ago after her father's death, when his debts had left her with nothing. She had fled St. Louis when the family she worked for as a governess discovered she had been teaching their daughters mathematics and science alongside literature and music. She had fled Sacramento when a doctor she had assisted accused her of stealing his techniques after she had successfully treated a patient he had given up on. Now she was fleeing again, always running, never finding a place to rest. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson that mocked her despair with their beauty. Nora finally slowed Juniper to a walk, the mare's sides heaving with exertion. They had covered perhaps 10 miles, following a trail that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. Behind them, dust rose in the distance. Her heart seized with terror. They were following her. She had been naive to think they would simply let her go. Roger's humiliation would not be satisfied with mere expulsion. He would want complete destruction, would want to ensure she could never settle anywhere close enough to remind him of his rejection. Or worse, some of the mob might have convinced themselves that running her out of town was not enough, that a woman like her deserved harsher punishment. Nora kicked Juniper back into a canter, scanning the landscape desperately for anywhere to hide. The trail ahead forked, one path continuing east into the foothills, the other turning north toward what looked like rougher country. She chose north on instinct, praying it would lead somewhere, anywhere that might offer sanctuary. The light was fading fast now, the brief California twilight giving way to darkness. Nora could barely see the trail ahead, but stopping was not an option. Behind her, she could hear voices now, men calling to each other, the thunder of multiple horses. They were gaining. Then she heard a single rider breaking away from the group behind her, moving faster than the others. The hoofbeats grew louder closer, and Nora's exhausted mind could not conceive of escape. Juniper was spent, her pace flagging despite Nora's urging. They would catch her. It was over. "Miss Easton," a voice called out through the gathering darkness. "Miss Easton, wait." The voice was male but not Roger's. It was younger, urgent but not angry. Nora risked a glance over her shoulder and saw a single rider approaching fast, separating himself from the pursuing mob by perhaps a quarter mile. In the dimness, she could not make out his features, only the silhouette of a man on horseback, riding with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. "Miss Easton, please," he called again. "I am not with them. I am trying to help." Every instinct screamed not to trust him, to keep running, but Juniper was stumbling now with exhaustion. If this man meant her harm, he would catch her regardless. Nora pulled the mare to a halt, her hand moving to the small knife she kept in her boot. It would be no match for a gun, but it was all she had. The rider approached and pulled his horse up a few yards away, holding his hands out to show he was not reaching for a weapon. In the last light of day, Nora could finally see him clearly. He was young, perhaps 25, with sandy brown hair that curled slightly beneath his hat, and a face that was honest and open in a way that made something in her chest ache with desperate hope. He wore dusty trail clothes and a dark vest, and his eyes, even in the dimness, were kind. "My name is Brennan Gaines," he said, his voice low and steady. "I work the Triple Bar Ranch about 15 miles north of here. I was in Angel's Camp picking up supplies when I saw what they did to you." His jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. "What they are doing to you? Why should I trust you?" Nora's voice came out harsher than she intended, raw with fear and exhaustion. "Because I am about to turn around and tell those men chasing you that you went east, not north," Brennan said simply. "And then I am going to lead you somewhere safe before they realize I lied. But we need to move now because they are less than 5 minutes behind us." Behind them, the voices were growing louder. Nora made a split-second decision based on nothing more than the honesty in Brennan's eyes and the desperate lack of options. "Where?" "There is a canyon about 2 miles north with caves that will hide us until they give up and go home," Brennan said. "Your horse is exhausted. Can she make it?" "She will have to," Nora said grimly. Brennan nodded and turned his horse to face the approaching mob. "Follow this trail north. You will see a rock formation that looks like a broken tooth on your left. Turn west there and keep going until you reach the canyon. Wait for me." "And if you do not come?" Nora asked. Something flickered in Brennan's expression, something that might have been hurt that she doubted him, but he pushed it aside. "I will come. I give you my word, Miss Easton. Now go." Nora hesitated only a second longer, then urged Juniper forward into the darkness. Behind her, she heard Brennan riding back toward the mob, heard his voice calling out something she could not distinguish. She did not look back. She focused on the trail ahead, on finding the broken tooth rock, on keeping Juniper moving despite the mare's exhaustion. The rock formation appeared like a shadow against shadows, and Nora turned west as instructed. The trail here was rougher, barely more than a deer path, and she had to trust Juniper's instincts more than her own failing vision. Time lost meaning in the darkness. She might have ridden for 20 minutes or an hour before the ground suddenly dropped away into a canyon, the walls rising on either side like the earth had been split open by some giant's axe. Nora guided Juniper down into the canyon, the descent treacherous in the darkness. At the bottom, she dismounted on shaking legs and stood holding the mare's reins, listening. The night was full of sounds, insects chirping, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the whisper of wind through the canyon, but no hoofbeats, no voices, no pursuit. Minutes passed like hours. Nora's legs began to ache from standing. Her shoulder throbbed where the rock had struck her, and doubt crept in like cold fog. What if Brennan had simply sent her into this canyon as a trap? What if he was leading the mob here right now? What if his kindness had been a lie designed to make her easier to catch? Then she heard it, a single horse moving carefully down the canyon trail. Nora's hand went to her knife again, her body tensing for fight or flight despite having nowhere left to run. The rider appeared as a darker shape against the darkness, and then Brennan's voice called softly, "Miss Easton, are you here?" Relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. "Here," she managed. Brennan dismounted and led his horse toward her. In the darkness, she could barely see him, but she heard the concern in his voice when he spoke. "Are you hurt?" "I saw them throw rocks, my shoulder," Nora admitted, "but I have suffered worse." "We should look at it once we are safely hidden," Brennan said. "There are caves about 50 yards into the canyon. The mob turned east like I told them, but Roger seemed suspicious. They might double back once they realize you are not on that trail." He led the way deeper into the canyon, moving with the confidence of someone who knew this land well. Nora followed, leading Juniper, her free hand trailing along the canyon wall for guidance. True to his word, Brennan found a cave entrance that was little more than a crack in the rock face, but which opened into a space large enough for them and the horses. "Wait here," Brennan said, and disappeared back outside. He returned a few minutes later with an armful of brush and branches. Working quickly and quietly, he arranged them across the cave entrance, not enough to completely block it but enough to conceal it from anyone not looking carefully. Only then did he strike a match, shielding the flame with his hand as he lit a small lantern he had pulled from his saddlebag. The light was dim but sufficient to reveal their shelter. The cave was perhaps 15 feet deep and 8 feet wide, the ceiling high enough that they could stand comfortably. The floor was sandy and dry, and there were signs that animals had used this space before, though none seemed to be in residence currently. "This is not ideal accommodations," Brennan said with a slight smile that did not quite reach his worried eyes, "but it is safe for tonight." Now that there was light, Nora could finally see him properly. He was handsome in an unassuming way, with a strong jaw covered in a few days' stubble, a straight nose, and those honest brown eyes that had made her trust him when every instinct said to run. There was a gentleness to his movements as he tended to his horse, removing the saddle and rubbing the animal down with handfuls of grass. "Why did you help me?" Nora asked abruptly. "You do not know me. You could have stayed in town, safe and uninvolved." Brennan paused in his work, then resumed, but she could see tension in his shoulders. "I know what it is like to be judged unfairly," he said quietly, "and I could not stand by and watch them hurt someone for the crime of being different." He glanced at her, and in the lantern light his expression was fierce. "What they did was wrong, Miss Easton. What they tried to do. You helped people in that town. You saved lives. Anyone with eyes could see that. The fact that Roger Whitmore could not accept your refusal and turned the whole town against you out of spite makes him the lowest kind of coward." The passionate defense surprised Nora, warming something inside her that had been cold for so long. "You risk much by helping me. If they find out you lied to them, then they will have to answer to me," Brennan said simply. He finished with his horse and turned his attention to Juniper, treating the exhausted mare with the same gentle care. "How long has it been since she had water?" "Hours," Nora admitted, shame coloring her voice. In her flight, she had thought only of escape, not of her horse's needs. "There is a stream not far from here," Brennan said. "I will take both horses there once I am certain the mob has truly left. For now, let me look at your shoulder." Nora hesitated, then nodded. The pain had settled into a deep ache that made movement difficult. She carefully lowered herself to sit on a flat rock, then began to ease the collar of her dress aside to expose her shoulder. Brennan approached slowly, as if afraid of startling her. He knelt beside her and raised the lantern to examine the injury. His touch was gentle as he carefully felt around the impact site, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. "The bone is not broken," he said after a moment, "but you are going to have an impressive bruise." "Do you have any supplies? Medicine?" "In my saddlebag," Nora said. "I grabbed what I could when I fled." Brennan retrieved her bag and handed it to her. Nora pulled out a small leather case containing the precious few medical supplies she had managed to save. She had lost so much in Angel's camp. Her room had contained books, more supplies, all abandoned in the terror of flight. These few items were all she had left of her calling. "I can treat it myself," Nora said, pulling out a small tin of salve she had made from comfrey and arnica. "I do not doubt your capability," Brennan said, "but it is difficult to treat your own shoulder. Would you trust me to help?" There was something in the way he asked, making it truly a question rather than an assumption, that made Nora nod. She handed him the tin and turned slightly to give him better access. His touch remained gentle as he applied the salve, his fingers carefully working it into the bruised flesh. The pain eased slightly under the treatment. "You are good at this," Nora said, surprised. "I've tended enough injured horses and cattle to learn something about wounds," Brennan said, "though I will admit human medicine is not my strength. What I saw you do in town, treating that railway worker, the knowledge you showed, that is remarkable. Where did you learn?" "My father was a physician in Boston," Nora said, the words coming easier than expected. Perhaps it was the darkness, the isolation, the fact that this stranger had risked himself for her. Perhaps she was simply too exhausted to maintain her usual guard. He wanted a son to follow in his profession, but he had only me. So he taught me everything he knew, even though it scandalized my mother's family. After he died, I discovered that society has no use for a woman with medical knowledge and no husband to legitimize her existence. "Society is often fool-minded," Brennan said quietly. He finished applying the salve and carefully helped Nora adjust her dress back into place. "There, that should help with the pain and reduce the bruising." "Thank you," Nora said, meeting his eyes, "for all of this. I still do not fully understand why you are helping me, but I am grateful." Brennan sat back on his heels and something complicated passed across his face. "5 years ago, my younger sister died in childbirth," he said, the words heavy with old grief. "She was only 19. The baby died too. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, that it was God's will, but I have always wondered if that was true, or if he simply did not know enough to save them. When I heard you had successfully delivered 3 babies in Angel's camp, babies that might have died without your help, I thought about what it would have meant if someone like you had been there for my sister." Nora's throat tightened with emotion. "I am sorry for your loss. And I am sorry that ignorant people drove you from a place where you were doing good," Brennan replied. He stood and moved toward the cave entrance, listening. The night was quiet beyond. "I think they have given up for tonight. Let me take the horses to water." "Will you be all right alone for a few minutes?" "I have been alone for a long time," Nora said. "A few more minutes will not harm me." Something in her words made Brennan pause. He looked back at her, and in his eyes she saw understanding that went deeper than mere sympathy. "You will not be alone anymore," he said quietly. "I give you my word on that, Miss Easton. I will help you find somewhere safe, somewhere you can practice your skills without fear." Before Nora could respond, he had gathered both horses and slipped out of the cave into the darkness. She sat in the dim lantern light, his words echoing in her mind. They were the words of a stranger, a man she had known for only a few hours, yet they carried a weight of promise that made something long dormant in her heart stir with hope. The exhaustion of the day crashed over Nora all at once. Her shoulder throbbed, her body ached from hours of riding, her mind was battered by the trauma of the mob's attack, yet beneath it all was a strange sense of peace. She was alive. She had escaped. And against all odds, someone had chosen to help her not because he wanted something from her, but because he believed it was right. Brennan returned perhaps 20 minutes later, the horses watered and calmer. He produced bedrolls from both their saddles, and arranged them on opposite sides of the cave, maintaining a respectful distance that Nora appreciated even as a small, foolish part of her wished he might sit closer. "We should rest," Brennan said, settling onto his bedroll. "Tomorrow we will need to make plans. The Triple Bar Ranch is a full day's ride north, and the owner, Mr. Patterson, is a fair man. He might be willing to offer you shelter until we can figure out something more permanent." "I cannot impose on strangers," Nora protested. "You are not imposing if I am inviting you," Brennan countered. "Besides, Mr. Patterson's wife is with child, their first after 10 years of marriage. I think she would appreciate having someone with medical knowledge nearby, given what happened to my sister." Nora was too tired to argue further. She lay down on the bedroll, fully clothed, and pulled the thin blanket over herself. The cave floor was hard, the blanket inadequate against the chill night air, yet she felt safer than she had in months. Across the cave, Brennan extinguished the lantern, plunging them into darkness. "Miss Easton." His voice came through the dark. "Yes. You are not unnatural or wrong for being educated and independent," he said firmly. "Those people in Angel's camp were afraid because you challenged their understanding of how the world should work. But the world is changing, and it needs more people like you, not fewer." Tears stung Nora's eyes at the unexpected validation. "Thank you, Mr. Gaines," she whispered. "Brennan," he corrected gently. "If we are to be friends, and I hope we are, you should call me Brennan. Then you must call me Nora." "Nora," he repeated, and somehow her name in his voice sounded like something precious. "Rest now, I will keep watch." Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Nora's mind churned through the events of the day, replaying the mob's anger, Roger's vindictive face, the terror of flight. But it also replayed Brennan's kindness, his gentle touch treating her wound, his passionate defense of her right to exist as she was. She had met many men in her 24 years, but none who had looked at her education and independence as assets rather than flaws. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to pale dawn light filtering through the brush covering the cave entrance. Brennan was already awake, sitting near the entrance and looking out at the new day. He had removed his hat, and his brown hair caught the early light, turning it almost golden. There was something about his profile, strong and thoughtful, that made Nora's breath catch. He must have sensed her waking because he turned and offered a small smile. "Morning. How is your shoulder?" Nora tested it carefully, finding it stiff and sore but manageable. "Better, thank you." "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough," Brennan said, which Nora suspected meant not at all. "I have been listening for any sign of the mob, but I think they truly gave up last night. Roger is not the sort for extended effort when drinking is an option." His expression turned grim. "He will likely be sleeping off his liquor this morning, not riding through the hills looking for you." "What happens now?" Nora asked, sitting up and trying to work the stiffness from her muscles. "Now we ride to the Triple Bar Ranch," Brennan said. "It will take most of the day, but the route is beautiful, and we should not encounter anyone from Angel's camp. The ranch is in a different county, and the folks there mind their own business mostly." They ate a sparse breakfast of jerky and hard biscuits from Brennan's supplies, then prepared the horses for travel. In the morning light, Nora could see the canyon clearly, its red rock walls striped with layers of geological time, scrub brush clinging to impossible angles. It was harsh and beautiful, like so much of California. The ride began in comfortable silence, following the canyon north until it opened onto rolling foothills. The landscape was painted in shades of gold and green, dotted with oak trees and the occasional burst of wildflowers that had survived the summer heat. The day was already warming, promising another scorcher, but a light breeze made the temperature bearable. As they rode, Brennan began to talk, telling Nora about the Triple Bar Ranch, about the work he did there training horses, about the quiet satisfaction of life lived close to the land. He spoke of Mr. and Mrs. Patterson with obvious respect, describing them as people who judged others by their character rather than their conformity to social expectations. Mrs. Patterson is originally from New York, Brennan explained, as they followed a trail that wound through a grove of oaks. She met Mr. Patterson when he was back east buying breeding stock. Her family disapproved of her marrying a rancher and moving west, but she did it anyway. I think she understands what it is like to defy expectations for the sake of living life on your own terms. She sounds remarkable, Nora said, hope kindling in her chest at the thought of meeting another woman who had chosen her own path. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat beside a small stream. Brennan proved surprisingly easy to talk to, asking questions about Nora's life and her medical knowledge with genuine interest rather than skepticism or condescension. She found herself telling him about her father's teachings, about the joy she felt when she successfully treated someone, about the frustration of constantly being dismissed or driven away. "It must be lonely," Brennan observed, "always moving, never finding a place to call home." "I have become accustomed to it," Nora said, though even as she spoke, she knew it was not entirely true. She had never become accustomed to the loneliness, she had simply learned to endure it. "You should not have to just endure life," Brennan said quietly. "You should be able to thrive." The simple statement hit Nora harder than she expected. When had anyone last cared whether she thrived? When had anyone looked at her life and seen not just survival but potential for genuine happiness? They continued riding, and as the afternoon wore on, Nora found her attention increasingly drawn to her companion. Brennan sat his horse with the unconscious grace of someone who had been riding since childhood. His hands on the reins were sure and gentle, the same combination she had felt when he treated her shoulder. He pointed out landmarks and wildlife with an enthusiasm that suggested he truly loved this land. And when he smiled at something she said, the expression transformed his whole face, making him not just handsome but genuinely beautiful. Nora sternly reminded herself that gratitude was not the same as attraction, that she barely knew this man, that allowing herself to feel anything beyond appreciation for his help was foolish. Yet her eyes kept returning to him, and her heart kept doing strange things when he looked at her with those warm brown eyes. The sun was sinking low when they finally crested a rise, and Brennan pointed to the valley below. "The Triple Bar," he said, and Nora could hear the affection in his voice. The ranch spread across the valley floor, a collection of buildings including a large main house, several barns, and various outbuildings. Corrals held horses, and in the distance, Nora could see cattle dotting the hillsides. It looked prosperous and well-maintained, a testament to hard work and careful management. As they rode down into the valley, Nora's nervousness returned. What if the Pattersons did not want her here? What if they saw her as a burden or believed the accusations that had driven her from Angel's camp? What if this brief respite was just another disappointment in a long line of them? Brennan must have sensed her anxiety because he reached over and briefly touched her hand where it rested on the saddle horn. "They will like you, Nora, I promise." The simple touch, fleeting as it was, sent warmth up Nora's arm and straight to her heart. She met Brennan's eyes and saw such certainty there, such faith in her, that she felt some of her fear ease. They were approaching the main house when the front door opened, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. She was perhaps 35, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a figure that showed clear signs of pregnancy. Her face was kind, with laugh lines around her eyes and a welcoming smile that reached her eyes. "Brennan," she called, "we did not expect you back so soon. Is everything all right?" Brennan dismounted and helped Nora down from Juniper, his hands steadying her when her stiff legs nearly buckled. "Mrs. Patterson, I apologize for arriving unannounced. This is Miss Nora Easton. She is in need of help, and I hoped you and Mr. Patterson might be willing to offer her shelter." Mrs. Patterson's keen eyes took in Nora's disheveled appearance, the bruising visible at her collar, the exhaustion in her face. Instead of suspicion or judgment, her expression filled with concern. "Of course. My dear, you look absolutely worn out. Please come inside." "Brennan, have one of the hands see to the horses. Miss Easton needs rest and a proper meal." The kindness, offered so quickly and without questions, made Nora's throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I do not wish to impose." "Nonsense, Mrs. Patterson said firmly, already ushering Nora toward the house. "Any friend of Brennan's is welcome here. Besides, I have been desperate for female company. My husband is wonderful, but his conversational topics run toward cattle and horses almost exclusively." The interior of the house was comfortable and lived in, with simple but well-made furniture and windows that let in plenty of light. Mrs. Patterson led Nora to a bedroom on the ground floor, small but clean, with a real bed covered in a colorful quilt and curtains that stirred in the breeze from the open window. "This is the guest room," Mrs. Patterson explained. "We do not use it often, but it is yours for as long as you need it. There is water in the pitcher for washing, and I will bring you something to eat. Then you should rest. Tomorrow will be time enough for explanations." Left alone, Nora sank onto the bed and felt tears finally break free. She had been holding them back for so long, through the terror and exhaustion and uncertainty, but now in this quiet room with its simple kindness, they flowed freely. She cried for what she had lost, for the home she had tried to build in Angel's Camp, for the endless struggle of being different in a world that demanded conformity. But beneath the grief was also a tiny seed of hope, fragile and new, that perhaps she had finally found people who might understand. A soft knock on the door made her hastily wipe her eyes. Mrs. Patterson entered carrying a tray with bread, cheese, cold chicken, and a pot of tea. She set it on the small table by the window, then surprised Nora by sitting on the edge of the bed and taking her hand. "I do not know what drove you here," Mrs. Patterson said gently, "but I see strength in you, my dear, the kind that comes from surviving things that would break lesser people. You are safe here, Mr. Patterson, and I will make sure of that." "Why?" Nora whispered. "You do not know me." "Why offer such kindness to a stranger?" Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Because Brennan Gaines is the best judge of character I know, and if he rode all the way here to bring you to us, then you are someone worth knowing. Also, between you and me, I have been terrified about this pregnancy given my age and the lack of a proper doctor within 50 miles. If Brennan mentioned correctly that you have medical knowledge, then your presence here might be as much a blessing for me as my hospitality is for you." The straightforward honesty was so refreshing after months of veiled comments and hidden agendas that Nora laughed, the sound rough but genuine. "He told you about my medical training." "He did, during our brief conversation just now while you were settling in," Mrs. Patterson confirmed. "He also mentioned that you were driven from Angel's Camp by ignorant people who could not accept a woman with education and independence. Their loss is our gain, I say. Now eat, rest, and we will talk more tomorrow when you have recovered." After Mrs. Patterson left, Nora ate ravenously, surprised by the depth of her hunger. The food was simple but delicious, and the tea was strong and sweet. Afterward, she washed as best she could with the provided water, changed into the spare dress from her saddlebag, and climbed into the bed. The mattress was soft, the quilt warm, and through the window she could hear the peaceful sounds of the ranch settling for the evening. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Nora felt safe. She closed her eyes and let sleep claim her. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting from somewhere in the house. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind, then memory returned in a rush. Angel's Camp, the flight, Brennan, the Triple Bar Ranch. Nora rose and made herself as presentable as possible, though her appearance was still disheveled. Her only other dress needed washing, her hair was a mess, and she had no mirror to assess the damage. Still, she squared her shoulders and made her way toward the sounds of activity. The kitchen was large and welcoming, with a massive stove and a table that could seat a dozen people. Mrs. Patterson was there, along with a tall, weathered man who could only be Mr. Patterson, and Brennan, looking slightly more rested than the previous day. They all turned as Nora entered, and she fought the urge to flee from their scrutiny. "Good morning, Miss Easton," Mr. Patterson said, his voice a deep rumble that matched his large frame. "I am Thomas Patterson. My wife tells me you are in need of shelter, and Brennan tells me you saved 3 lives in Angel's Camp before ignorance drove you out. Anyone who uses their skills to help others is welcome on my land." The speech was gruff but sincere, and Nora felt her shoulders relax slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Patterson. I do not wish to be a burden." "You will earn your keep," he said simply. "My wife needs care during her pregnancy, and we always need extra hands on a ranch. If you are willing to help where needed, then we will be square." "I would be happy to help in any way I can," Nora said, meaning it. Breakfast was a lively affair, with easy conversation and generous portions. Mr. Patterson asked about Nora's medical training, listening intently as she described her father's teachings. Mrs. Patterson, who insisted Nora call her Charlotte, asked about Nora's journey west and her experiences in various towns. Brennan mostly listened, but Nora noticed his eyes on her frequently, watchful and warm. When Charlotte asked how Nora had escaped Angel's Camp, Brennan told the story, downplaying his own role but making it clear that the mob had been dangerous and wrong. "Roger Whitmore is a coward and a fool," Thomas said flatly when the story was done. "I have had dealings with him before. He tried to cheat me on a horse sale. I will spread word among the local ranchers that Miss Easton is under our protection. That should discourage any trouble." After breakfast, Charlotte took Nora on a tour of the ranch, showing her the gardens, the chicken coops, the dairy barn. The Triple Bar was largely self-sufficient, growing or raising most of what they needed. The work was hard, Charlotte explained, but satisfying in a way that city life never was. "I was raised in comfort in New York," Charlotte said as they walked. "My family expected me to marry a banker or lawyer, someone respectable and boring. Instead, I fell in love with a rancher who smelled of leather and horses, and I have never regretted it for a moment." She smiled at Nora. "Society's expectations are prisons we impose on ourselves. The day you break free is the day you truly start living." "I want to believe that," Nora said quietly. "But every time I think I have found a place to start living, something drives me away." Charlotte took Nora's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "Then perhaps it is time to stop running and start fighting for your place. You have allies now. You are not alone." Over the following days, Nora began to settle into life at the Triple Bar. She helped Charlotte with household tasks, worked in the garden, and spent time learning the rhythms of ranch life. Charlotte's pregnancy was progressing well, but Nora kept a careful eye on her, checking her health regularly and offering advice on diet and exercise. She also saw Brennan nearly every day. He worked with the horses in the morning, often breaking or training new animals, and his skill was evident in how the horses responded to him with trust rather than fear. In the evenings, he often joined the Pattersons and Nora for dinner, and afterward they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. Nora found herself looking forward to these evenings more than she wanted to admit. Brennan was easy company, quick to laugh and always interested in what she had to say. He asked about her medical knowledge with genuine curiosity, and she found herself explaining techniques and theories she had never discussed with anyone except her father. Brennan listened intently, asking smart questions and making connections that showed he understood more than most. One evening, about a week after Nora's arrival, Brennan asked if she would like to see the rest of the ranch. Thomas and Charlotte both smiled knowingly at the invitation, which made Nora blush, but she agreed. They saddled horses, Juniper for Nora and Brennan's steady gelding, Dakota, and rode out as the day began to cool. Brennan led them to the high pastures where the cattle grazed, then to a stand of oaks where a spring fed a clear pool. The place was beautiful and peaceful, the kind of spot that felt removed from the world's troubles. "I come here when I need to think," Brennan said as they dismounted and let the horses drink. "It reminds me that there is still beauty in the world, even when things are difficult." "Is your life difficult?" Nora asked, surprised. Brennan always seemed so steady, so at peace with himself and his place in the world. "Sometimes," he admitted. He picked up a smooth stone and turned it in his fingers. "After my sister died, I felt lost for a long time. I questioned everything. God, fairness. Why good people suffer while cruel people prosper. Eventually, I realized that questioning why brought no answers. The only thing I could control was how I chose to act. I could let bitterness consume me, or I could try to make the world a little better where I could." "Is that why you helped me?" Nora asked softly. "To make the world better." Brennan turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "At first, yes. But Nora, I need to be honest with you. These past days, getting to know you, seeing your strength and your kindness and your brilliant mind, I find myself drawn to you in ways that go beyond simply wanting to help." Nora's heart began to pound. "Brennan, I know it is too soon," he continued quickly. "I know you have been through trauma and need time to heal. I am not asking for anything from you. I just wanted you to know that you are not just someone I helped. You are someone I admire deeply, someone I care about." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Nora's mind raced with all the reasons this was complicated, why allowing herself to feel anything for Brennan was dangerous, but her heart was singing a different song entirely. "I care about you too," she said, the words barely above a whisper. "You saved my life, Brennan. You showed me kindness when the world showed only cruelty. How could I not care?" "I do not want gratitude," Brennan said firmly. "If you feel anything for me, I want it to be real, not just because I helped you." Nora stepped closer to him, her hand coming up to touch his cheek. The stubble was rough against her palm, his skin warm. "It is real," she said. "I do not fully understand it yet, but when I am with you, I feel safer and happier than I have in years. You see me, Brennan, not what society says I should be, but who I actually am. That is not something I have experienced often." Brennan's hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his face. "I see someone extraordinary," he said. "Someone brave and talented and kind. Someone who deserves to be treasured, not driven away." They stood like that for a long moment, the space between them charged with possibility. Then, Brennan slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and careful, a question rather than a demand, and Nora answered by rising on her toes and kissing him back. The kiss was sweet and tender, holding more promise than passion, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, their eyes locked. "I have wanted to do that since the first time I saw you," Brennan admitted with a shy smile that made him look younger. "Even in the midst of that terrible situation, covered in dust and afraid, you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen." Nora laughed, the sound bright with joy. "I must have looked absolutely dreadful." "You looked brave," Brennan corrected, "and beautiful, and like someone worth knowing." They stayed by the spring until the sun set, talking and stealing kisses, building the foundation of something precious and new. When they finally returned to the ranch, both wore matching smiles that made Charlotte laugh with delight and Thomas shake his head with amused resignation. Over the following weeks, Nora and Brennan grew closer. Their courtship was conducted in stolen moments between work. Brennan teaching Nora to rope during her lunch breaks, Nora treating a cut on Brennan's hand, and using the opportunity to hold his fingers longer than necessary, shared glances across the dinner table that spoke of growing affection. Nora also grew closer to Charlotte, forming a friendship that fed her soul. Charlotte was intelligent and well-read, and she and Nora spent many afternoons discussing books, politics, and the changing world. Charlotte's pregnancy was progressing well, though Nora could see signs that the delivery would be challenging given Charlotte's age. About 6 weeks after Nora's arrival, Thomas returned from a trip to the nearby town with disturbing news. "Roger Whitmore has been asking about Miss Easton," he said over dinner, his expression grim. "He is spreading lies, saying she stole from people in Angel's camp before fleeing, trying to destroy her reputation even though she is long gone." Nora felt cold fear trickle down her spine. "I stole nothing. I barely had time to gather my own belongings." "We know that," Charlotte said firmly, "and everyone whose opinion matters knows it too. Roger is just trying to salvage his pride." "Nevertheless, it might be wise for Nora to stay close to the ranch for a while," Brennan said, his jaw tight with anger. "At least until Roger moves on to some other obsession." The thought of being confined again, even for her own safety, chafed at Nora's independent spirit, but she recognized the wisdom in Brennan's words. Still, the situation left her unsettled. Would she ever be free of Roger's vindictiveness? Would he continue to haunt her life, ruining any chance at peace? Brennan must have seen the distress in her face because he reached under the table and took her hand, squeezing gently in reassurance. The simple touch grounded her, reminded her that she was not facing this alone. That night, unable to sleep, Nora slipped out of her room and onto the front porch. The night was clear and cool, the stars brilliant overhead. She was so lost in thought that she did not hear Brennan approach until he spoke. Could not sleep either. Nora turned to find him standing in the doorway, barefoot and wearing only his trousers and an unbuttoned shirt. The sight of him, tousled and domestic, made her heart flutter. "I keep thinking about Roger," she admitted. "How long his vindictiveness might last. Whether I will ever truly be free of it." Brennan came to stand beside her at the porch rail, his shoulder brushing hers. "He is a small man trying to feel big by tearing others down. Eventually, people see through that. His lies will not stick because the people who matter know your character." "Do they?" Nora asked quietly. "Or do they just tolerate me because you and the Pattersons vouch for me?" Brennan turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Nora, you delivered Martha Johnson's baby last week when I brought her here after her labor went bad. You saved that child's life. You have been helping Charlotte prepare for her delivery, easing her fears and teaching her what to expect. You treated half a dozen ranch hands for various injuries and ailments. The people of this area are forming their own opinions of you based on what you do, not on Roger Whitmore's lies. I want to believe that, Nora whispered. Then believe in us, Brennan said, taking both her hands in his. Believe in what we have been building together. Nora, I love you. I have loved you since that first night in the cave when you showed such courage in the face of fear. I love your mind and your strength and your compassionate heart. I love that you refuse to be anything other than who you are, even when the world punishes you for it. The declaration, spoken with such fierce certainty, made tears spring to Nora's eyes. I love you too, she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I did not think I would ever feel safe enough to love someone, but you make me feel like I can have a life beyond just survival. Brennan pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other under the stars, and Nora felt something settle in her soul. For the first time since her father's death, she felt like she might have found a home. 3 months after Nora arrived at the Triple Bar, Charlotte went into labor. It was early November, and the first winter storms were rolling through, making the night wild with wind and rain. Nora had been half expecting this timing, as she had noticed signs that Charlotte's body was preparing for delivery. Thomas was near panic, his usual calm shattered by fear for his wife. Brennan had to physically restrain him from hovering while Nora worked. Charlotte, by contrast, was remarkably composed, following Nora's instructions and trusting in her skill. The labor was long and difficult, as Nora had anticipated. Charlotte's age made the process harder, and there were moments when Nora's heart clenched with fear that she would lose both mother and child. But she had learned from her father's experiences, had studied every case history she could find, and she refused to give up. 17 hours after labor began, a baby's cry filled the room. Nora carefully delivered a healthy boy, his lungs strong and his color good. She cleaned him quickly and placed him on Charlotte's chest, then turned her attention to ensuring Charlotte's bleeding was normal and that no tears required stitching. When she was finally satisfied that both mother and baby were stable, Nora allowed Thomas into the room. The big rancher's hands shook as he touched his son's tiny head, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. "Thank you," he said to Nora, his voice breaking. "Thank you for giving me my family." Exhausted but elated, Nora stepped out of the room to find Brennan pacing the hallway. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes searching her face anxiously. "Both healthy," Nora said, smiling. "A boy. Charlotte did beautifully." Brennan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for hours and pulled Nora into his arms. "You are amazing," he murmured against her hair. "You saved them." "I helped," Nora corrected, but inside she felt a deep satisfaction. This was why she had struggled for years to practice medicine despite society's disapproval. This moment, this family whole and healthy, this was what made it all worthwhile. The baby, named Benjamin, thrived under Charlotte's and Nora's care. Watching Brennan with the infant was a revelation. He was gentle and patient, holding Benjamin with confident ease and singing him soft songs when he fussed. Seeing him like this, Nora could imagine him as a father, and the thought made her heart ache with longing. As winter settled over the ranch, life found a comfortable rhythm. Nora had become an indispensable part of the household and the wider community. Word of her skill had spread, and people came from surrounding ranches seeking her help with various ailments. Some paid with money, others with goods, but Nora turned no one away. Roger Whitmore's lies had faded into irrelevance, drowned out by the testimony of people Nora had helped. Occasionally, someone would mention the rumors, but they were quickly dismissed. Nora's reputation was being built on evidence, not gossip, and it was a foundation that could not be easily shaken. On a cold December evening, Brennan asked Nora to take a walk with him. They bundled up against the chill and walked to a spot on the ranch where a massive oak tree spread its bare branches against the winter sky. A wooden bench sat beneath the tree, and snow dusted the ground around it. "I built this bench last month," Brennan said as they sat. "I wanted a place that was just ours, where we could come and talk or just be together." The thoughtfulness of the gesture warmed Nora more than any fire could. "It is perfect." Brennan took her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar and dear. "Nora, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You have brought light and laughter and love to days that used to feel empty, despite being full of work. You have shown me what it means to truly admire someone, not just for what they look like, but for who they are at their core." Nora's heart began to race as Brennan shifted to kneel in front of her in the snow, still holding her hand. From his pocket, he pulled a simple gold band. "This ring belonged to my grandmother," he said. "It is not fancy, but it is given with love that runs deeper than I knew was possible. Nora Easton, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here where you can practice medicine and be exactly who you are without fear or shame? Will you let me spend the rest of my days showing you that you are treasured?" Tears streamed down Nora's face as she slid from the bench to kneel in the snow with him. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Brennan Gaines, I will marry you. I will build a life with you. I will let you show me every day that I have finally found home." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit, and then they were kissing through tears and laughter, the cold forgotten in the warmth of their joy. When they finally returned to the house, their news was met with celebration. Charlotte cried and hugged Nora fiercely. Thomas shook Brennan's hand with gruff approval, and even baby Benjamin seemed to coo his congratulations. They were married in February 1874, in a small ceremony at the ranch with Charlotte and Thomas as witnesses and a traveling circuit preacher officiating. Nora wore a dress Charlotte had helped her sew, simple but beautiful in ivory fabric that caught the light. Brennan wore his best suit, his eyes never leaving Nora's face throughout the ceremony. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Brennan kissed Nora with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of love and respect. Afterward, they celebrated with a feast Charlotte had spent days preparing, and neighbors from surrounding ranches came to offer their congratulations. As Nora looked around at the smiling faces, at the community that had accepted her, at the husband who loved her exactly as she was, she felt a profound sense of peace. The journey that had brought her here had been hard, marked by loss and rejection and fear, but it had led to this moment, to this life, to this love. That night, in the small cabin Thomas had given them as a wedding present, Brennan and Nora consummated their marriage with gentle passion. It was Nora's first time, and Brennan was patient and tender, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Nora marveled at how different her life had become. "What are you thinking?" Brennan murmured, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I am happy," Nora said simply. "For the first time in years, I am genuinely happy." Brennan kissed her temple. "You deserve happiness, Nora. You deserve everything good this world has to offer." As winter gave way to spring, Nora settled fully into her new life. She established a small clinic in one of the ranch's outbuildings, with Thomas's blessing and Brennan's help in fixing it up. People came from miles around for treatment, and Nora's reputation as a skilled healer grew. She delivered babies, treated injuries, diagnosed illnesses, and provided care with skill and compassion. Brennan continued his work with the horses, but he also began helping Nora with her practice, learning basic first aid and assisting when she needed an extra pair of hands. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs and supporting each other's goals. In May, Nora discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with both joy and fear, knowing the risks of childbirth better than most. But Brennan's excitement and Charlotte's support helped ease her worries. Charlotte, now an experienced mother, provided advice and reassurance, and Nora knew she had the knowledge to care for herself. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Nora continued her work until the final weeks, when Brennan insisted she rest more. Their daughter was born in January 1875, delivered by Charlotte with Brennan assisting. The labor was relatively quick for a first child, and soon Nora held a perfect, healthy baby girl in her arms. "What should we name her?" Brennan asked, his eyes wet with tears as he looked at his daughter. "Grace," Nora said without hesitation. "Because Grace brought us together and gave us this life." Brennan kissed Nora's forehead. "Grace Gaines, it is perfect." Grace proved to be a happy, healthy baby who thrived under her parents' loving care. Nora cut back on her medical practice for a few months to focus on motherhood, but by the time Grace was 6 months old, she had returned to regular work, often with Grace in a sling against her chest while she treated patients. One afternoon in late summer, a wagon rolled up to the ranch carrying a family of homesteaders. The man explained that his wife had been having pain in her belly for days, and they had heard that a skilled healer lived at the Triple Bar. Nora examined the woman and recognized the signs of appendicitis. It was a dangerous condition, one that could kill if the appendix ruptured. The woman needed surgery, a procedure Nora had only assisted with once, years ago with her father, but she knew the theory and technique. "I can try to help her," Nora told the anxious husband. "But I need to be honest. The procedure is risky and she might not survive it. However, without the surgery, she will almost certainly die." The man agreed immediately, desperate to save his wife. Nora prepared her clinic, laying out instruments and asking Brennan and Charlotte to assist. She walked them through what she would need them to do, then said a silent prayer that her hands would be steady and her memory accurate. The surgery took 2 hours of intense concentration. Nora worked carefully, removing the inflamed appendix and ensuring no infection remained. The woman's pulse stayed steady, her breathing regular, and when Nora finally closed the incision, she allowed herself to hope. The woman survived. She recovered slowly over the next weeks, staying at the ranch while Nora monitored her healing. When she finally left with her grateful husband, word of the miraculous surgery spread throughout the region. Nora's reputation grew from that of a skilled healer to something approaching legendary. More patients came, some from over 100 miles away, seeking Nora's help. She treated them all, and Brennan built additions to her clinic to accommodate the increased need. Thomas eventually suggested that they formalize the arrangement, and Nora became the official doctor for the region, though she could never claim the title legally as a woman. Years passed in productive contentment. Grace grew into a bright, curious child who loved following her mother around the clinic and asking endless questions about healing. In 1877, Nora gave birth to twin boys, James and Daniel, who inherited their father's easy nature and their mother's quick mind. The cabin that had once seemed spacious became cramped with 3 children. So Brennan built a larger house on a plot of land Thomas sold to them at a generous price. Nora's practice continued to grow, and she began training other women in basic medical skills, creating an informal network of healers throughout the region. Charlotte became one of her most dedicated students, and together they delivered dozens of babies and saved countless lives. In 1880, Roger Whitmore died in a bar fight in Angel's Camp, stabbed by a man he had cheated at cards. The news reached Nora months after the fact, brought by a traveling merchant. She felt no joy at his death, only a sad recognition that his bitterness had ultimately destroyed him. She had built a life far beyond anything he could have touched, and his attempts to ruin her had failed completely. By 1885, Nora was 36 years old and the mother of 5 children, the last 2 being another girl and boy born in 1882 and 1884. Her medical practice was thriving, her reputation unassailable, her marriage as strong and loving as ever. Brennan, now 40, had taken over management of the Triple Bars horse breeding program when Thomas decided to semi-retire, and his skill had made the ranch's horses sought after throughout California. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over the mountains, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 16 years had passed since that terrifying day when she had fled Angel's Camp, chased by a mob for the crime of being different. So much had changed, yet the core of who she was remained the same. "What are you thinking about?" Brennan asked, his arm around her shoulders, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long familiarity. "About that first day," Nora said, "when you rode after me and brought me here. You called this place home, and it became mine too." Brennan kissed her temple, a gesture that had become habit over their years together. "You made it home by being here, by sharing your gifts and your love. I just opened the door." "You did more than that," Nora said, turning to face him. "You saw me when others looked away. You valued me when society said I was worthless. You loved me when I had forgotten how to be loved. You saved my life, Brennan, in every way that matters." "And you saved mine," Brennan replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Before you, I was just existing, going through motions without real joy or purpose. You taught me what it means to live fully, to fight for what matters, to build something meaningful. These years with you have been the greatest gift of my life." They kissed, still finding magic in the simple act after so many years together. From inside the house, they heard their children laughing, and Nora's heart swelled with gratitude for this life she had built from the ashes of rejection. The next day, a young woman arrived at Nora's clinic, nervous and hesitant. She was perhaps 20, with intelligent eyes and educated speech, and she explained that she had been driven from her town for being outspoken and refusing a marriage proposal. Nora looked at this young woman and saw herself 16 years ago, lost and afraid and desperate for refuge. She took the woman's hand and said, "You are safe here. Tell me your story." As the young woman, whose name was Sarah, poured out her tale of rejection and flight, Nora made a decision. She would do for Sarah what Brennan and the Pattersons had done for her: offer shelter, support, and the chance to build a life free from society's constraints. Over the following months, Sarah became part of their household, learning medical skills from Nora and finding her place in the community. She was the first of several young women Nora took in over the years, all fleeing situations where their intelligence or independence had made them targets. Nora trained them, supported them, and helped them build lives on their own terms. The network of women Nora created became known informally as the Angel's Camp Healers, a deliberate reclamation of the place that had rejected her. These women provided medical care throughout the region, often going to places the few male doctors would not travel. They attended births, treated injuries, diagnosed illnesses, and saved lives, all while supporting each other in a world that still did not fully accept them. In 1890, Nora's oldest daughter Grace, now 15, announced her intention to follow her mother into medicine. Nora's heart swelled with pride and concern. The path was still difficult for women, but it was becoming more possible. The first women's medical colleges had been established back east, and the idea of female doctors was slowly gaining acceptance. "I will support you completely," Nora told Grace. "But I want you to understand how hard it will be. People will doubt you, dismiss you, tell you that you are not capable. You will have to be twice as good to be considered half as worthy." "I know, Mama," Grace said with the confidence of youth. "But you showed me it is possible. You have been a doctor in everything but name for as long as I can remember. If you could do it without formal training or recognition, imagine what I can do with both." Nora hugged her daughter tightly, tears in her eyes. This was the world she had fought to create, where her daughter could dream of achievements that had been denied to Nora herself. It was not perfect, not yet, but it was better. It was progress. As the century drew to a close, Nora looked at the life she had built with profound satisfaction. She was 50 years old, still practicing medicine, still teaching and learning, still finding joy in helping others. Brennan was 55, his hair gray now but his eyes still bright with love when he looked at her. Their 5 children were growing into remarkable adults, each finding their own path in the world. Grace did eventually go east to medical college, becoming one of the first female doctors in California when she returned with her degree in 1898. She opened a practice in Sacramento, but she returned to the ranch frequently, often bringing difficult cases to consult with her mother. The two of them, formally trained daughter and self-taught mother, made a formidable team. Thomas Patterson passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1895, and Charlotte followed him 2 years later. They left the Triple Bar Ranch to Brennan, recognizing that he had been like a son to them and trusting him to carry on their legacy. Brennan ran the ranch with the same integrity Thomas had shown, and under his management, it continued to prosper. In 1900, as a new century dawned, Nora and Brennan celebrated their 26th wedding anniversary. They stood at the same spot where he had proposed, under the oak tree that had grown even more massive over the years. The bench was weathered now, but still sturdy, a testament to Brennan's craftsmanship. 26 years, Nora marveled. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday that you rode after me into the darkness. "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Brennan said, pulling her close. "Every day with you has been a gift, Nora. Even the hard days, the times we struggled or disagreed or faced challenges, all of it was worth it because we faced it together." "I love you," Nora said, the words as true and necessary as breathing. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Brennan replied. "My brave, brilliant, beautiful wife, thank you for letting me share your life." They kissed under the oak tree as the sun set, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The journey that had begun with fear and flight had ended in love and home, and Nora knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The years continued to pass, bringing the changes and challenges that time always brings. Nora's medical practice gradually shifted as her body aged, focusing more on teaching and consulting than hands-on care. She wrote down everything she had learned, creating detailed manuals that her students could use, determined that her knowledge would outlive her. Brennan remained active on the ranch until his early 70s, finally conceding to age and turning daily management over to their twin sons, James and Daniel, who had inherited their father's way with horses. But he still spent every morning walking the property he loved, and he still met Nora for lunch every day, a tradition that had begun in their first year of marriage and never wavered. Their children gave them grandchildren, 14 in total, and Nora delighted in teaching the girls and boys equally about medicine and science and the importance of kindness. Several of the granddaughters followed Grace into formal medical training, building on the foundation Nora had laid. In 1910, when Nora was 61 and Brennan was 66, California passed a law officially recognizing the right of women to practice medicine. The law came decades too late for Nora, but she celebrated it with fierce joy, knowing that the young women she had trained would never face the rejection and persecution she had endured. At a celebration in Sacramento, Grace stood before a crowd and told the story of her mother, the self-taught healer who had saved countless lives despite society's efforts to stop her. "My mother showed me that a woman's worth is not determined by society's acceptance," Grace said, her voice ringing with pride. "It is determined by her character, her skill, and her willingness to help others." She practiced medicine when it was illegal, when it was dangerous, when the world told her she had no right. She persisted because she knew the work was more important than the obstacles. "She is my hero, and she should be yours too." The crowd gave Nora a standing ovation, and she stood there with tears streaming down her face, Brennan's hand clasped firmly in hers. All the pain and struggle of those early years felt worth it in that moment, validated by the change she had helped create. As Nora and Brennan entered their 70s, their love remained as strong as ever. They were rarely apart, still finding joy in each other's company, still able to make each other laugh, still reaching for each other's hand as naturally as breathing. Their relationship had weathered decades, raising children, building careers, facing loss and celebrating joy, and it had only grown deeper and more precious. On a warm June evening in 1915, they sat on the porch of their home as they had done thousands of times before. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Around them, the ranch was alive with the sounds of family, their children and grandchildren visiting for the summer. "You ever regret it?" Brennan asked suddenly. "That day I convinced you to come here instead of running further. Do you ever wonder what your life might have been if you had kept going?" Nora turned to him, seeing the uncertainty in his eyes, the fear that even after all these years, she might wish for a different path. She took his weathered hand in hers, feeling the calluses earned from decades of honest work, and said, "Not for one single moment. That day when you rode after me in the darkness, you were not just chasing me, you were calling me home. And I have been home ever since, not because of the place but because of you. You are my home, Brennan Gaines. You always have been." Tears glistened in Brennan's eyes, and he pulled Nora close, holding her as the sun completed its descent, and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. They sat there together, surrounded by the life they had built, the love they had nurtured, and the legacy they would leave behind. Years later, when historians wrote about the early days of women in medicine in California, Nora Easton Gaines was prominently featured. They told the story of her flight from Angel's Camp, of the cowboy who rode after her and offered her sanctuary, of the decades she spent healing and teaching and fighting for women's right to practice medicine. But what those histories could not fully capture was the love story at the heart of it all, the deep and abiding partnership between two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something beautiful together. Nora passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1923 at the age of 74, with Brennan holding her hand. She had lived a life of purpose and meaning, had helped countless people, had trained a generation of healers, and had loved and been loved completely. Brennan followed her less than a year later, his heart simply unable to continue without hers. They were buried side by side under the oak tree where Brennan had proposed, the tree that had witnessed so many of their moments together. Their gravestone was simple, bearing their names and the dates of their lives, but at the bottom, their children had inscribed, "She was chased from town for being different. He rode after her and called her home. Together they changed the world." The story of Nora and Brennan became legend in their family, passed down through generations as an example of love that transcends social boundaries, of courage in the face of persecution, of the power of one person to make a difference. Their descendants continued their legacy, becoming doctors and ranchers, teachers and healers, all carrying forward the values of integrity, compassion, and the courage to be different that Nora and Brennan had embodied. The clinic Nora established continued to operate for decades after her death, staffed by women she had trained and their students. The ranch Brennan had managed remained in family hands, a testament to his stewardship and love of the land. And the oak tree, ancient and enduring, stood as a living monument to a love that had started in darkness and fear, but had grown into something luminous and eternal. In the end, Nora's story was not one of being driven away but of finding her way home. It was not about the town that rejected her, but about the man who accepted her, the family that embraced her, and the life she built through determination and love. She had been chased from Angel's camp for being different, but Brennan had ridden after her and shown her that being different was exactly what made her extraordinary. Together, they had proven that home is not a place you find but something you build with the person you love, one day, one choice, one act of courage at a time.